Hi, everyone. I'm Tish, CEO of CANDOR Consulting. I'm so excited to have a guest join me, Gunter Pfau, CEO and founder of Stuzo. Before I jump in and talk about our topic, team chemistry, I do want to provide a little background on who Gunter is. As CEO and founder of Stuzo, Gunter is the vision behind producing really an open commerce business that manages software to help loyalty and consumer engagement. He's got customers like Sunoco, Murphy USA, Marathon, not to mention Google and Facebook. I'm excited because Gunter's going to talk about the vision of how he built a strong team to navigate the vision of his business into his customers. So welcome, Gunter. I'm excited to have you here today.
Very excited to be talking about team chemistry with you.
Yes, team chemistry. And I know it's something near and dear to you and I, but I'm not sure everybody understands exactly what team chemistry is. So from a CEO perspective, which is who I support as I work with all my customers and clients, how do you describe team chemistry?
We think about team chemistry as a way of working together where we best leverage each other's strengths and support the things that may be more difficult for each other. And when I talk about the things that are more difficult for each other, people typically think about weaknesses. The way that we think about it is that we all have natural thought patterns, natural behavioral tendencies, and personality traits. And those thought patterns, behavioral trends, and personality tendencies either really align well with a certain activity or a task that we have to do for work, or they don't align. And there's a spectrum, right? So if I have to do something, as an example, perhaps it's public speaking, and my brain and who I am naturally as a person really aligns well with that, that task is going to be relatively easy for me. I can be trained on it quicker than somebody else. I will grasp it quicker than somebody else, and it's going to, over time, be something that is much more natural and intuitive for me. So team chemistry is not just the notion of, again, leveraging strengths and supporting the things that are harder. It's creating this environment and a way of working that empowers us to truly be able to do that.
Hey, when you use the word empowers, I think it's probably the beginning of where we start. Because I know when you and I work with just your leadership team, it is about building a leadership team that's going to be a good fit for not just the company, but the CEO. So as a CEO, when you're looking at bringing on people who are going to be empowered, but you also have to have vulnerable conversations with them about what they're not strong at or areas that they are not going to be the best at. I have found that in having those conversations with people who are extremely bright and very professional in what they've done and how they got to where they are, how do you have that conversation to help them realize that team chemistry is not about them, it's about the overall composition of how the team is built?
So I like to start with me. I am pretty terrible at a lot of things, and I am very open about the things that come harder for me than they might for others. And I have discussions with our executive team around how we complement each other, and on an individual basis with specific people around, from my perspective, the strongest executive is somebody that is incredibly self-aware and incredibly secure in knowing that they're not going to be the best at everything, and they're not going to be able to do everything within their role that is at such a high level so that the business can succeed incredibly. So it's having that conversations. And for myself, again, I like to use the things that I struggle with or that my brain just doesn't naturally align to and my behaviors don't naturally align to as examples. And that typically starts a conversation. And said differently, the conversation starts with vulnerability. So I'm a big believer in vulnerability attracts people. It's kind of like the two sides of a magnet. And when I can be vulnerable, or when we have an environment where we empower our team to be vulnerable, we're able to start having those conversations, and we're able to drive a very high level of self-awareness. And then, we work with you, and we use DISC as a tool that helps us understand our natural styles, our natural thought patterns, how we might react under stress. And I think you can talk a bit more about that than I can. You're so well versed in it.
Yes, I do think the vehicle that we've used and still use every time we even bring on new people, right?
Yeah,
I mean, I
of
do
course.
think it's a chemistry that continues to evolve. And you do start with you. So I can definitely attest that you are one of the most open and honest people about yourself, and look at it from the things you are very able and capable, and the things that you know that you may not be. Not everybody's going to be that open to that sort of feedback. And when you're utilizing a vehicle like this, at least what we both found in working with your teams, is it gives them a neutral element to understand themselves. And so I do think that the understanding is probably better than assessing, right? So what we use this vehicle to do is help us understand one another. And that takes away some of the threat of it being an evaluation. And I do think that has helped a lot. I know you have recently acquired a company, so you had to integrate new leaders into an existing team that was together for maybe 7 years. And so that's not easy for a CEO to do without offering their team that awareness and observations of who they are. And DISC has been tremendous for that. And I do find that that helps people become comfortably vulnerable, if you want to put comfortably in front of vulnerable, because being vulnerable is not an easy thing to do, even if it's something that you believe. You still don't like to talk about it. And so as we navigated, at least I remember with your team, give me an example where having that conversation was challenging because they were not seeing it the same way. How were you able to get them to see that we need to complement each other and not finger point? We need to address the things that we do well only by the things we don't do well, so we can marry it all together, because it is all about the team's chemistry. No different than science. You know, two pieces together have to make something. As soon as you change those two pieces, something new comes out. How did you have that difficult conversation with one or two people if you didn't see them responding well to the methods we wanted to use?
Well, I think in some parts, Tish, you were a support structure to us as a leadership team, and you helped us to work through some of those conversations. I'd say a couple of maybe, I don't know if difficult is the right word, but a couple of sort of what I would say cultural nuances that we had to deal with when we were onboarding a few senior folks were folks that were coming to us from large companies that had a different way of operating and a different type of culture than we do. While vulnerability is difficult, I'm a big fan of Brené Brown, and I really believe that it's our greatest strengths. And it's something that we strive for in our day-to-day at Stuzo. That's not the typical way of operating of some larger organizations that are more not how do I say it, speaking about or masking the things that are harder for you is more the status quo, and having folks think about that everything is a strength is the way to go. So,
well, also let me add to that.
Please.
One thing that I think is also important to highlight: when you're a nimble organization, that every team member really has a big part in the greater puzzle that we're trying to solve, it's harder to not be able to deliver, or it's hard not to notice when they're not delivering. Where I do think in a larger organization, because I have worked with both, people can hide a little bit of some of the things that they may not be as good at because another is compensating it, but there's so many bodies and people and talents that it's not as missed. But when we're running a business where everyone needs to really carry their own sort of strength and know what they're not strong at, it becomes a lot more noticeable if someone's falling down, right? Would you say that's the difference between, say, a mid-size to more of a larger corporation where it's not about the individuals, it's about the groupings of how individuals operate, versus in a more nimble organization, it's about every individual. Everyone matters.
I would say that's definitely true, and adds to, or in addition to, the culture of that organization. There are some organization where speaking about the things that may be more difficult for you to do as an employee is not acceptable. with us, that's rewarded. I want our team to be able to openly reflect on how easy it is or how difficult it is for them to do the work that they need to do. And not just to reflect, but also to think about those items or those specific pieces of work in relation to how easy or difficult it may be for one of their coworkers to do it. If you see somebody else in the organization that can do a task 3 times faster than you and 4 times more effective, it's most likely that that task should be given to that other person and not to you. And you need to have an environment where people feel very safe and secure in their jobs to be able to come to you as a manager or as a leader and say, hey, I actually want Bob's help with this because Bob's going to do it significantly better than I am. So, and that's true team chemistry. So in terms of, those conversations that are most difficult, those are sometimes difficult conversations to have if you don't have the right environment, or if somebody comes from an environment where those types of conversations were not the norm, where those types of conversations were not rewarded. Now imagine that somebody has been in environments like that for over 10 years, and most of their entire career has been working very well to their strengths, but also in some ways maybe putting up a facade in the things that they're not quite as strong at as they're leading out to be. For us, we want to empower and reward vulnerability and having those open and honest conversations, because it's only when we can all understand the things that we are truly exceptionally strong at and the things that we're never going to be exceptionally strong at, that we can match each other. And that's, I think, to your point, that's that chemistry where we can truly unlock our chemistry and truly unlock each other's strengths. And we're then this perfect harmony. And I believe that's our biggest competitive advantage. So the way that we work together as a team, the level of team chemistry that we have is by far and beyond our number one competitive advantage, because it's our people that develop our strategy. It's our people that develop our go-to-market, our products, our solutions, how we serve our customers. And the better and the more caring that we have with each other, the better all of those other things are going to perform.
And it also allows it to grow beyond the leadership team.
Without
so right now, what I'm hearing what you talk through, and something that all CEOs should focus on is start with me. What are my vulnerabilities? What are my strengths? And then as you add those players around the table that you're going to have trust and respect for, you need to also be able to have the honest conversations. And it's not skill as much as it is behaviors. I think it is a combo, but it is more about how they do something, because we could teach skills, but it doesn't mean they're going to be great at it. It's really how they do it that makes it something that they're really, really going to be strong at, and where someone else might do it better. And so utilizing that awareness to giving that to the team does impact success and performance. And a perfect example is just the other day I was talking to one of your hiring managers, and they said, I have to make some hires on my team, and I first want to put together my own sort of vulnerability chart. What do I need to be looking for as a complement to add to myself and my team? And I do think that is all through the work you've enforced with your leadership team to be comfortable managing their own growth as individuals, to actually help it manage Stuzo as a company. And that's where performance can be a metrics for this team chemistry concept that we're talking through. Is that chemistry will change based on the people around that table. So the CEO's job is to make sure the chemistry is always healthy, always efficient and effective, and always one that's producing results. But then each individual on that leadership team should be able to do the same thing with their teams. And that's how, you witness it at Stuzo, and across the board as I work with other companies, I can see where it's not. And, sometimes, unless they're very open to looking at themselves first, sometimes it's a very hard discussion to start to manage, because the CEO's number one job is to make sure talent and the executive leadership team that they build has the team chemistry that marries to them, but also to produce results. Have you ever had an opportunity where the team chemistry did not feel right to you and you knew you had to do something? They may have been skilled to get the job done, but the chemistry of how they worked together wasn't there.
Absolutely. And, I want to touch a little bit of, you mentioned the word compliment. I talk a lot to our teams at every level, and the more senior you are, I think the more this applies because the larger your teams are. To me, an exceptional leader is always hiring their complement. They understand, again, that they're not going to be able to do everything on their own. They're not going to be perfect at everything. And they surround themselves with people that are stronger than them in most areas. They understand that they're going to be exceptional at, a subset of things that are very important for their role. And then they go and hire really, really strong people that can perform the rest of the responsibilities.
But you would have to have created a safe zone for that as CEO, right? Because
of course,
I think people would have a fear that if they are hiring their replacement, if you will, or someone who is as good or perhaps better at certain things, their own job security could be in line. So how do you make someone comfortable that that is what you expect them to be actually in their own skin?
I think it comes back to vulnerability, and the environment that we create around that. Nobody at Stuzo should ever or will ever have a fear of getting fired for saying that, hey, this thing here is harder for me, or I need help. I need additional resources or support to be able to achieve what I need to achieve within my department at the highest level. To me, the most astute, the most amazing executive that you could hire or have a conversation with, an initial conversation to me would be, so let's imagine that we're talking and we're hiring for an executive level or leadership level position, and this is our first conversation. If you came to me, Tish, and you said, hey, listen, I understand that this role needs to do these 10 things. I'm exceptional at these 3. I will run circles around everybody that you put in front of me with these 3. These 7, I also recognize how critical they are for the overall team and department to function. But I'm going to tell you, within these 7, some of them I'm decent at. Some of the other ones, there are other people that can do those and execute them as well as I can do the 3. My commitment to you is not that I will be the best at those 7 ever. What I'm going to do is I'm going to evaluate the team that you have today, and I'm going to see whether they're exceptional at those 7. And if they're not, I'm going to ask for your support for me to come in and hire a team that can do those 7 as well as I do the 3 that I just talked to you about. That to me exemplifies true executive leadership, and that they're exceptionally self-aware. They're exceptionally secure in the things that they do in themselves. And they understand and are showing and supportive of the environment that we want, that you don't have to be great at everything to be exceptional in your role in leading a team, in leading a department.
And I don't know if everybody's always comfortable. And I do think having people have an observation of their performance and giving them feedback is so important, because that would keep people to feel the trust to share what they're good at. And in an interview, I think it's harder.
It is.
And you have to really meet lots of people to go through that. I have to say it's not the easiest part of hiring. However, you happen to use the profiling as part of their hiring process to help identify
That's right.
where there may be some success traps or areas that are going to potentially be consistent to what you've seen in the past, where it could be not their strength, and help that person unpack that with you, because you do spend that much time with every key hire you make. You are intricately involved. How have you gotten your management team to see the same value in each of their hires playing a part like that for them?
I think I can't say that's been perfect, that we've not made mistakes. I empower our team to sometimes make mistakes. So we use DISC, as you mentioned, as a non-threatening way for us to understand each other. I based on, my many years now of working together with you and have become an astute student of DISC, I tend to have a spidey sense of when somebody from a behavioral standpoint may not be the right fit for a specific role. I'll call it out. However, I'll let our team make the final call. And we've made a couple of mistakes, and the team has made a couple of mistakes, and it's from mistakes. When I say mistakes, forgive that word, mishires, where the behavioral tendencies weren't fully aligned with what was needed, and the cultural alignment wasn't there in terms of vulnerability and leading with vulnerability. And it's what happens is if we do that, how do I say this? I empower the leadership team and the hiring managers to self-correct. And I'm a big believer and something that we talk about a lot internally is what can we learn from this? So every time that maybe a hire doesn't work out, we have the conversation of what can we learn from this? Is there a way that we don't maybe do the same exact thing that we just did again? So reflection, learning. And then I want to go back a little bit to your point around it being difficult to assess those things in interviews. I start in our first conversation, if I'm hiring somebody for our leadership team, I talk about vulnerability, and I really have a lot of conversations with our leadership team. And they also, in the early conversations that they have, they talk about vulnerability, and they talk about our culture, and they talk about team chemistry. And we very quickly can tell when somebody aligns to that, because either they're going to be like, wow, this is so refreshing. I want to be a part of something like this. Or you may get certain defensiveness and where it's like, even if this is something that might be interesting or aligned with them, they're not used to it. And it may be too much of a struggle or a stretch. So we try to have those conversations early on. And then I point to, Brene Brown has a lot of amazing videos. There's a Netflix special on vulnerability and how it's your greatest strength. There are certain candidates that I've asked to watch certain videos. And then we have a conversation about those the next time that we talk. So the more senior the role, the more I would say of a courtship or
the more open to vulnerability they should be able to be, right? They should be able to have those conversations.
100%. If not, at least this is for us, right? If not, there isn't really a good cultural fit if that isn't there. So for us, it's really foundational because we can't empower team chemistry without it.
I think that's interesting as a point to make for other CEOs, that it's not the same chemistry for every team.
No.
And I have probably now worked with 100, if not more, real different companies, different leaders, different leadership teams, different sizes of the teams. And I think what's so unique about the CEO's role, and why I always like to start at least understanding them to help them understand themselves. You came understanding yourself is very self-aware, but I cannot say every CEO that I have worked with is very aware or willing to be aware. But it really does start there, because team chemistry cannot happen if the CEO is not fostering an element of where all of the pieces of this puzzle that they are creating has to come together to be able to be effective and healthy as a team. Mm-hmm. You can hire terrific individuals to accomplish individualistic things like their function. But we all know a function has to align with another function in an organization. And I think it's important that, and you raised this, that you started with you. And I know just in the years we've worked together, your leadership team has changed. And each time it changed, you had to rejigger your thought process around the chemistry of that team, because each player brings their own strengths and their own vulnerabilities and their own abilities. And you also turned away some very strong, skilled, professional, talented people because it did not align with the team chemistry for Stuzo and you as its leader. Were those difficult to do? Because I think about CEOs who are not as strong and actually bring on the wrong people and then don't understand why the chemistry of everyone is not working well together. How have you managed that?
Some of them were, and I think one of them, in particular, without getting into too great of a detail, where the individual was an advisor and a tremendous mentor to me over the years, and has always been outside of the organization. But as we scaled and we did an acquisition, we thought that it might be right to bring the individual in to lead a function, a department. And as amazing as the relationship that I had with that person, more in an advising, a mentee capacity, bringing that person in full time, really changed the chemistry. Not just the chemistry between myself and that person, but also the impact on the chemistry and the connectivity that we had with our leadership team. That was a difficult thing for me because of the relationship that I had with this individual. But it was also something that I knew would hold the organization back if I didn't address it head on. So I think my I guess thinking or guidance to anybody that's going through that is, you have to be able to have the courage, both for yourself, for the organization, and for that person, to address when it's not the right fit, and to do so with a tremendous amount of respect and mutual vulnerability.
Which that example did, and I do remember the conversations that led up to it, because it was surprising,
right,
that when chemistry between two people could be so good in a certain circumstance, and then all of a sudden change when there are other elements to the circumstance and the situation. And I think for a CEO, it's not just about them. It is about them, and yet how it all aligns with the whole team. And I do think you probably could have maintained the relationship if it was just the two of you. But I do think because it impacted how the rest of the org and that leadership team functioned in being able to work the best it can together, you had a very difficult discussion and a very difficult decision to make. And you did it rather timely, quite honestly. And I do think time is very important when it comes to knowing when team chemistry is working or not. You can have something last too long, and it can really bring dysfunction to an entire business. Forget the team for a minute, but now the whole business is impacted. And I thought you also acted timely. When did you know it was time?
I think somewhere between about going on 30 days into it. I started to get a feeling that this was off. And I would say you should know typically, as a leader or as a hiring, as somebody that you hire on your team within the first 30 days, if it's a fit or not. Like there are signals, and I would say, look, hire slow, fire fast. We tend not to fire often. Especially because of the way that we optimize for team chemistry. But if the chemistry isn't right, absolutely it's going to be something that spreads and that can hurt the team and then ultimately hurt the company. Something else that you mentioned I thought I want to touch on a little bit, which is I think it's the responsibility of the CEO or the leader to understand the chemistry of their team. So let's assume that I have a team of 5 or 6 people. To understand what would happen if one of those people were to leave the team, not just on the chemistry that you have with them, but the chemistry and the interrelation between what the strengths are of that one person that might leave and how it would impact the other team members on the team. Meaning, what is that one person doing in terms of strength, and how is their chemistry with the other team members? How are they maybe buttressing the things that may be harder for some of those other 4 team members, and vice versa, and what happens when one person leaves? I think, we tend to use sports analogies sometimes at work, and it's really interesting how sports teams, it's very clear when they lose, whether it's a quarterback or a running back. I'm actually not into sports myself much. But it's not quite as clear. And what we try to do is make it as clear and understand, and have our team leads really understand the chemistry of the team and how it would be impacted whether somebody else leaves or somebody joins that team. Not just for one person, but for the entire team.
And there is an equation of some sort, or something that a CEO has to have in their mind with metrics and science. I mean, as we talk about it, even the word team chemistry, when I used to utilize it early on, I think some CEOs thought it was a nice to have. Oh, yes, it's cultural. Everyone gets along. Everybody has an open door. We can speak freely about stuff. But that's not what we're talking about here. This is so much deeper. And I think it's probably one of the top 3 things a CEO or a leader needs to focus on is when they're building that team and the team chemistry, there is some science behind how it has to work. Using the behavioral profiles is step 1. Being vulnerable and self-aware is step 2. Communicating with your team, what you just described, when there's changes, how we have to then pivot and adjust. Recognizing selfishness about just your function is not important in the greater good of the whole team. If you had advice, having lived through it, with the pros and the cons of probably 11 years ago when you maybe started Stuzo, did you have team chemistry up there as the top 3 things the leader CEO need to focus on? When did it hit home that, oh my gosh, this is like my number 1 priority that only I own because I actually make those decisions on those people that I'm bringing on board? When did you realize it was important?
So, in I guess my entrepreneurial career, I sold the business early on, and we were acquired by a pretty exceptional entrepreneur that had IPO'd before, and the purpose of this was roll up plus IPO. It was 9 acquisitions in an 18-month period, and we had at the individual level an exceptionally a group of exceptionally talented and experienced and skilled leadership team members. But we didn't have an environment where chemistry was there, where we were supporting each other. That leadership team should have been able to accomplish almost anything, given on paper the resumes, the skills, etc. But that leadership team imploded. And that was because there wasn't a focus on team chemistry, because there wasn't a purposeful thought process around how to leverage each other's strengths for the greater good of the business. And that was a real painful learning experience for me. It was 2 years of working together and trying to insulate actually our team post us being acquired from that culture. And then, interestingly enough, being able to spin back out of that because of a lot of unrelevant things, and then coming back and reflecting on how could an organization with almost an endless amount of money and an endless amount of talent fail. And it really came back to team chemistry. And there's a little book that I think is also really interesting and good that sort of talks about team chemistry, but in a different way a little bit. The 5 dysfunctions of a team. That was a dysfunctional team. So when we've got a really high degree of chemistry, or team chemistry, we have a highly, highly functional team. And I just doubled down on it coming out of it. And I'd say it took me some time. I like to call myself young and dumb. So I would say even 5 years ago, I think when we first met, Tish, I was still somewhat young and dumb. And I hope, honestly, to look back 5-6 years from now and say, you know what, Gunter at 43-ish, was still relatively young and dumb. But so it sort of, you mature as a CEO, you mature as a leader, and be very purposeful in your maturation. Be very purposeful in your self-awareness. Be very purposeful in you being vulnerable. I think in some ways for me, the vulnerability, as you know, I'm legally blind. So if we're talking and I'm having a conversation with somebody face to face, even if they're standing or sitting 3 feet from me, I can't see their facial gestures. That is a core weakness, physical limitation that I have. It's easy for me to talk about and say, hey, listen, I need somebody in the room with me that can read facial expressions, that can read body expressions, because I can't. I think perhaps that was one of the things that empowered me to also be able to say, above and beyond my physical limitations, I have so many other things that I'm not exceptional at, but that we as a business need somebody else that is really exceptional at those things. I think perhaps it was a bit easier for me, but I'd say, again, for CEOs or for anybody and that wants to be a manager and wants to be a leader of people, self-awareness, vulnerability, understanding that we're more than okay with not being perfect at everything. But for the organization to really, really succeed, we want people that are exceptional. And it doesn't need to be one person. It's just a group that really, really works well with each other and supports each other.
Which is true. It's never one person, right? Even if you get back to your sports analogy, you got that one great person on the team. They can't carry the whole team. It's unrealistic and it's not scalable, right? It's a team. And, one of the things that I've noticed with the pandemic is that your vulnerability and not being able to see things as easily as the rest of us, which we took advantage of, got lost when we're not actually able to be as together and are involved with each other. And most of our interactions is through video, which has its elements of strength, but also the lack of human interaction to see some of the things that we miss when we're not together, which is definitely, I see a tremendous increase. Maybe not for the same reasons of yours, which are you grew into realizing how important it was. I think today, more and more leaders and CEOs and founders are really looking at someone like myself to say, I've got to focus on who I'm bringing on and how they interact together and how they work with me and how they build sort of this unity, which we've now labeled the team chemistry part, because it is not so easy to do. And they're looking for a roadmap or a way to do it. And I think what you and I have just talked about in a lot of detail from your experiences as that CEO is that there is a way to do it. There are tools available and there's a process and there's an element to what you need to do that you actually can start to plan the success of the business around that team chemistry instead of the success of the business planning how you build it. I think you need to start with having the right team. And the right team doesn't look the same today, which is all the right resumes from all the popular places that have credentials that do not by far reach where everyone could actually go as a team. Because I've worked with so many companies where I say it's not the service, it's not the product, it's not their things that they do. Sometimes I have found teams that actually had not the best product in the world or the best service, but the team was so gelled and worked so well together. And that chemistry was they skyrocketed with something that was so either a commodity or just like a billion other things, but what made them special? And then there are companies that had a magical, amazing thing that they were offering, could not get out of their own way, could not make decisions. And when I tried to explain that it was starting from the core of the team, nobody wanted to take ownership of that, especially not the leader. And so what happened was it would fall apart. It would be the sad story of an A movie, A actors in a B movie that never made it because they should have, and you wonder why it didn't work. Well, it didn't work because they didn't make a focus as the leader of that group to spend the time, the energy to actually build a team with team chemistry. And thank God we came up with a way to do it because it sounds like, you were proof that if you actually put certain things in order, it actually helps you make better choices and integrate different levels of individuals to work together that people have never thought can actually work well together.
Absolutely.
So what is your parting gift to other CEOs at this point that you would offer on team chemistry?
Make the conscious choice, be purposeful, and make team chemistry a core focus, a strategic focus of the business. Again, I'll say for us, it's our number one competitive advantage. The way that we work together makes everything else better. So thank you again for having me on, Tish. Very much appreciated. You know how passionate I am about
I
this.
enjoyed talking about it. And I have to say, Gunter, every person on your team does actually speak about team chemistry in the same way you do. So whatever it is you're doing, just keep doing it, because quite honestly, it has sunk in to become a habit that people are actually following. So thank you. It's been great to see you again.
Thank you.